folks. Welcome to this edition of Todd's podcast. I want to welcome Major General Retired Larry Martin, a two-star Air Force general officer who's dedicated 32 years of his life and his family's life in the service of our country. I met General Martin a couple of years ago through mutual friends, and we are co-workers as senior consultants at Two Blue Aces, which is a leadership and mentoring company located here in Florida. Welcome, General.
Todd, it's wonderful to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Well, I couldn't be happier. So in doing my research, you have this incredible resume from flying to training to leading troops to civilians. You were wing and squadron commander. You taught history at the Air Force Academy. You were a command pilot with over 3,700 hours in the C-130, the KC-135, E-8, UV-18B, and the C-37 aircraft. I'm sure I've left a couple out of there.
It's been a really fun adventure.
Yeah, but I did some research to see what they were. So I'm not sure if I missed any, but, your life has really been in the Air Force, but you did not go to the Air Force Academy. Is that correct?
No, I did.
You did. It was Sparky that did not.
Sparky did not. Okay. And I left home in Minnesota when I was about 17.
Right.
Mom and Dad literally had to sign the permission slip and send me off. And I have not lived back in Minneapolis, where I'm from, since.
What was your major in college? I mean, what were you thinking?
Well, getting my major was an interesting lesson because when you go to the Air Force Academy, you're going to go and you're going to be an aeronautical engineer, right, or a physicist or a electrical engineer. And I had a wonderful professor my first semester who noticed that I was pretty good in history. And I didn't think a degree in history, first of all, be a Bachelor of Science in history was possible. And he looked at me and gave me some great advice. And the advice was, do something you enjoy. And I said, why? He says, well, because when you leave the academy, where you go and what you get to do is based on your class rank. And your class rank will be better if you do something you enjoy. He said, it's worth about half a GPA point to you, maybe a little bit more.
Wow, what great advice.
And he said, he said, at the end of the day, when you go to pilot training, doesn't matter if you had a aeronautical engineering degree, you went to the Air Force Academy, you took a bunch of aero, you took a bunch of physics, you took a bunch of civil engineering, but do what you enjoy, get a better grade, and excel at that. And I've kind of kept that, and I use that as I talk to young people, because I think, Todd, as you know, if you're doing something you love, you're not working.
Right.
And it's your passion, and it's something that you enjoy.
Excellent advice. I just listed a whole bunch of airplanes that you flew. What was your favorite plane to fly, and what was the most difficult one? You flew turboprops, jets, bigs, smalls?
Well, the one I fell in love with, and I apologize to my wife Julia, because she knows that the airplane that I'm going to mention is my first love, and that was the C-130.
Right.
C-130 is a 4-engine prop airplane. The Air Force has been flying it since the mid-1950s. It is literally the Ford F-150 of airplanes. You can put anything. It's not super big, but you can get what you need in the back of it. It'll go anywhere. And we'll talk later, I think, about the book Leadership at 100 Feet. As I mentioned in the book, it was where I learned to become part of a crew. So my love for it was in that I was good at it as I got to fly it. My love for it was I loved the crews I got to be with and the mission that we did and the variety of the mission. Later on, I got to fly. I've gotten to fly some of the wonderful airplanes of the world. The Twin Otter I flew at the Air Force Academy is an all-time classic airplane where we flew and cadets jumped out of the airplane. I then transitioned later on, and I had come from the Twin Otter, which tops out at about 150 miles an hour.
Really? And
can land with a soft field landing, can land in about 300 feet. To the KC-135, which is the Stratotanker, the airplanes that we fly here in Florida, which is an amazing, it's the Boeing 707. It is an absolute classic. And it is the Cadillac of the skies, but it doesn't go slow. It is your mom's Cadillac going down the highway. It cruises at high speed. When I took off the first time in training in Oklahoma, I'd been flying this 150 mile an hour airplane, and I was at 250 miles an hour in an empty airplane, faster than I knew, and I literally left some of my underwear back on the runway. I asked the instructor pilot if I could go back and get it as we took off. That was the hardest airplane to fly and to land
Because of the speed?
because it was so different from what I'd flown before.
Okay.
Turboprop, slower, designed to land. This was an airplane designed to go fast, and in aviation, everything's a trade-off. If you're good at going fast, you're not good at going slow.
Right.
And the KC-135 lands great, but it's just harder to, and it was harder for me. So as humbling as I was a experienced instructor pilot, I had to learn how to do that again when I was further in my career. A lot of fun to do. And then when I got here to Tampa, one of the airplanes I got to fly was the Gulfstream 5. And my boss at the time looked at me and he said, "Oh, you're going to love flying the Gulfstream." I said, "Why is that, sir?" He says, "You can't do a bad landing in it." And I just said, "You just cursed me that I'm going to crash it one day by telling me that I can't do it." But it was a spectacular airplane for that. So I haven't ever had a bad airplane that I got to go fly, and I got to go fly a whole bunch more in the desert when I was at a base in Southwest Asia where we had all sorts of airplanes, and I learned a lot from all of them.
Did you ever say, "I wonder what it would be like to be a fighter pilot," or I
did.
think it's a different mindset from what I've noticed with some of you guys.
Well, it is, and there's the story, if you remember, in the first chapter, and I'll clean up the story here for the podcast. I was a young cadet about to go to pilot training, and we were visiting a base down in Louisiana. And there were about 10 of us sitting around the dinner table, sponsored by an Air Force family. And it happened to be 2 Air Force nurses, male and female. And the female nurse looked at all of us and said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And we all went around the table, and I was the last one: fighter pilot, fighter pilot, fighter pilot, fighter pilot, fighter. And I got to be fighter pilot. And I said, "I want to be a fighter pilot." And she looked at me and she said, "Nah, you won't be a fighter pilot." And 21 years old, I moped around the rest of the night. I thought she'd punctured my ego, and it was horrible. So later that night, she came up to me and she said, "Larry," she says, "why are you moping around?" And I said, "Well, scratch the ground. You told me I wasn't going to be a fighter pilot." And she said, "Well," and she used a different word than I'll use now. She says, "You don't have the personality to be a fighter pilot." And as I work, and there are other partners at Two Blue Aces with both Jake and Rob Palumbo, fighter pilots, Beef Haddad, who's a heavy driver like me, Sparky Franks, who's a helicopter pilot like me. We all have a little different personality.
Right.
And that was humbling to a 21-year-old, but true. I didn't have the skills needed. I wasn't as good in the types of things that a fighter pilot needed to do. I was really good in other things.
Absolutely.
And so the lesson to me again was hard on the ego when you're young, with what you think you want to go do. Much better to go find what you were good at and excel at that and do that very well. So I go back to the C-130. I got onto that crew, and I loved flying that mission, that crew, those people, and I fit in there.
And how many? What is the size of the crew on a C-130?
5 people. When I was flying, it's smaller now. It's more automated now, but there was a choreography. Todd, there's an old when you fly the C-130 and your crew is together a long time, you get bored. So at the end of the day, you figure out how you're going to figure out who's going to buy the drinks that night.
Right.
And the way that you do it is on the nose wheel. There's a hubcap. And you divide it in 5 equal parts, and you put each name on it. And if yours is the low one, when you stop, you buy the drinks that night.
Okay.
And we were on a set of missions in Europe where the crew was together for about 3 months, and I kept buying the drinks. It was like 6 nights in a row, and I was screwing up horribly, I thought. And the loadmaster, was tech sergeant, old crusty Vietnam War veteran at the time, comes up to me, and I'm moping around. He says, "Lieutenant," he says, "LT, why you moping around?" I said, "Well, Sergeant, I'm not doing very well." I said, "I'm buying the drinks every night, and I'm screwing up on the radios, and I'm doing all this." He says, "Let me give you a hint." He says, "I'm going to tell you 2 things." He says, "One, your job is that you're on the intercom all the time, so everybody on the crew knows when you make a mistake. I'm in the back. nobody can see when I make a mistake.
Right.
He says, but everybody knows when you make a mistake, and we're going to pick on you for it because you're also the youngest guy in the crew.
There you go.
He says, and oh, by the way, the hubcap spins. And so when I get out of the jet, the aircraft commander tells me who's going to buy the drinks that night, and I spin the hubcap to where it's going to go. And he looks at me, he winks at me, and he says, who do you want to have buy the drinks tomorrow night? And I said, the navigator. And he said, it'll cost you $20. I said, worth it.
Worth it.
And the next night, the navigator bought the drinks.
There you go. I think that's a wonderful story. You know, when we were downstairs right before we came on to do the podcast, you had mentioned that you and your family had lived in 16, 17 different places. And I would assume that's fairly normal for a person who makes their lifetime career as an active duty personnel, active duty officer. As you go through the ranks, you get promoted, you get transferred. What was the most fun place you ever lived in your family? I'm sure you've lived all over the world. You know, where did you like it the best? Where did they like it the best?
I didn't not like anywhere.
Wow, that's great.
We were lucky in that. I did not care as much for living on I-95 up in the D.C. area.
Right.
That's not a political statement. That's just a lifestyle and a pace and the crowded of being in the urban. Interestingly, Todd, most of it we were on I-35 in the middle of the country.
Right.
And I'm from Minnesota, and then down in Texas and down through St. Louis and Kansas and all those kinds of places. The communities were great. We got to live in Hawaii. We got to live down here. We loved living down here and working in Tampa. It was a phenomenal job. I got to be the base commander over at MacDill. We loved the community as we did that. So you
think that's why you retired back to the Tampa area?
Absolutely. Julie and I were getting ready to retire. We were up in Washington D.C. We were walking one night on the Potomac. Where do you want to go? Where the really nice people, good friends, place we want to go? Tampa. Okay, we'll go back there.
Good.
But it wasn't. But in the same conversation, there was, and Wichita has great people. We'd be happy if we went back there. Our family's in Little Rock. Boy, that'd be great. Hawaii's probably a little far to be from family at the time.
Right.
We didn't care as much for D.C. Alabama, we just didn't have the ties to. Kansas, we would have gone. Again, St. Louis, we would have gone back to in a heartbeat. So, that's the sort of, and that's a symbol too, Todd, of the great communities we got to live in and the way that those communities support, take care of their military members and the families that are there. So we were just lucky. I mean, we got to live in some really cool places. My boys grew up. I had a very, very good friend who moved even more than our family did, and he was asked at his retirement because he moved. I think Mike moved like 20 times in his career, and as he got there because his father retired as a 4-star, and as he retired, he said, my brother and I, we always thought the kids that had to go to the same school every year were the ones who were unlucky. We thought we were lucky because we got to go to a new school every year, make new friends, have new adventures every year, and we never got bored. That's a pretty cool attitude.
Pretty cool attitude.
Yeah, about it.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. Once again, that's svnsaunders.com or by phone at 877-518-5263.
You've mentioned your wife Julia and your boys. when you came back to Tampa. Now your boys are in the military.
They are.
Tell us about your family a little bit.
Wife Julia, met her in Little Rock. She claims that her mother put an ad in the base newspaper, and I answered it. No, we had mutual friends who introduced us, and we went from there. We just celebrated 32nd wedding anniversary, so pretty cool with that. Two boys. Eldest boy Jeff is the outgoing one. Was a reporter. Worked for Defense News for a bunch of years after coming out of college. Was on a trip one day with another senior Air Force officer back to the base I'd been at in Kansas. Called me after the trip and said, "Dad, I'm doing the wrong thing. I need to get back in the family business. I'm looking at my peers, and they're making a difference." So he went to officer training school. He couldn't go fly like he wanted to for some medical reasons, and ended up going into the Space Force. And so he just returned from a deployment after being in the Space Force. He is having a fantastic time as an intelligence officer. Works out in California. My younger son went to college in Arkansas. Better athlete than his brother. Loved that. Didn't intend to go in the service, but liked doing PT with the Army ROTC kids. Did that, got an Army ROTC, ended up being a military policeman. He too just returned from a deployment. He'll take about 6 weeks with us at home, and then we're going to help him move up to Massachusetts, where his next assignment's going to be. So they came on of their own. Neither of them went to the academy. They both kind of came both late in life and decided that they liked the service, they liked the camaraderie, they liked the mission, they liked what was going on. So it's fun.
Do you think they'll make a career out of it like you did, or do you think, hey, this is a good 5 or 6 year gig, and then I want to move on to something different?
Whatever I'd say, they'd prove me wrong.
There you go. Most kids do.
Yeah, and I hope that they find and continue to enjoy what they like, and they seem to so far. But much like I've talked to, I used to have people that came to me when folks were getting out of service after their enlistment, and they'd go, "Well, grumble, so-and-so's not going to stay in for the long term." And I said, "Did they serve out their enlistment?" "Yeah." I said, "Okay, what do we say?" They'd say, "Well, what do you want to say to them about it?" "Thank you."
Yeah.
Okay. Some of my best friends left after initial terms because for good reasons for their family. It's not a competition for how long you go. It's the way you can serve, the enjoyment you get out of it, the service that you have, and then, not surprisingly, a lot of my friends that got out came back in the reserves,
Right.
like Mumbles, like Robert, and like Beef, as they came back, or they served their community in a different way.
I've noticed being around you guys that it's incredible respect for each other, incredible respect for each other's families, and you're always trying to look out for the best thing. And I see that as you talk about other people in the military. That's who your basic family has been, is you've made these friends in this incredible organization, and they're scattered all over the country, all over the world for that matter. And I just think it's really neat to see the folks that have made a career out of it like you, or done the time in the reserves as well, and just the relationships that they all have maintained.
Well, there's in the military, and there are lots of careers that are like this, but particularly in the military, you have a lot of people who did things for you. That family I mentioned in Louisiana,
Right.
Took 10 of us in, fed us that night. I never got to go back and thank them, but I could thank them by then taking care of another family,
Right.
in a way as we did it. And there's an attitude of that. One of the rules when our kids went to college was that there either needed to be family within a few hours drive, or there needed to be somebody from the military family,
Right.
that they could, again, not to watch over them, but if they needed,
You got someone.
you got someone that's there. And we were always blessed by having, again, either that real blood family member or
Right.
the military family member.
So I know you flew most of your career, but you did some time on the ground. If you weren't a pilot, what do you think you would have ended up doing?
Well,
Teaching?
I love teaching and going back. And that was sort of I get to go do this again for 4 years, and
Right.
to go be a little bit of a geek and dig into the books that I enjoy. I also gained a lot of respect for folks who make that their profession, and to go. It's one thing to teach, and it's another to go on, get your PhD, become a professor. That's a whole level of dedication. And I had that choice to do that in my career. I chose to go on then and continue to do leadership and to go on with that. But who knows? And that's part of the fun right now that we're doing, Todd, is we're figuring out in our next life after the military what we're going to go on and do. The passion that we have and what we want to do is to help people get better in leadership and to help them to teach to do that. We got to be really flexible in our career, but we learned fairly quickly what worked with leadership and what didn't.
So you just brought up leadership, so we'll pivot to that right now. It's a topic you're passionate about. It's a topic I think you're an expert on in identifying, training, coaching, and encouraging people. What are the three main qualities you look for in either a future leader or an existing leader that you say, hey, this guy or gal is going to be super, or with a little bit of coaching, I can bring something out of them?
I think the thing that it starts with me is always a sense of their integrity. And that's not something that somebody wears as a billboard on their forehead as they come up, but it's the basic foundation that has to go on for somebody as a leader. They have to be competent in what they do, and they have to have a passion for what they do. And then you work, and then there are a lot of intangibles that go from there. You can have all the integrity in the world. You can be very talented in what you do. You can have a great passion for what you do, and you might not be a good leader.
Right.
With that. And I think as Jake and Mumbles and Beef and Sparky and I can walk into a room, into an organization, and get a very good sense as we watch people who the leaders are, who the leaders aren't, as they come in. Is the organization running well? Is it not? And we are passionate in our belief that the foundation of that comes from having good leaders.
And you had mentioned the book. We had talked about leadership. So, as you've retired from the Air Force, you've been quite busy. You're an ace with 2 Blue Aces.
Yes.
You do leadership training and mentoring. You're a book author. If someone's looking to you to help them with their company, maybe a member in their family that they've kind of identified, hey, this son or daughter is going to take over my business at some point, and they need some high-level outside coaching, how do they find you? What do they do? Go to the website?
The website's a good place to go, twoblueaces.com. We talk about the various things that we offer. And we're not there are a number of folks that as you go on the internet and on the web, that will give you their golden road to leadership. That we tend to believe that there are characteristics of leadership that are important, but we also want to talk to you and to find out what you want to have and what you want to have happen in your organization or for you or for the person. And we don't believe that there's any cookie cutter formula that gets you that do this step, do this step, do that step. No, when the most fun we've had is to sit down with an organization and say, where do you want to go? Oh, you want us to talk to somebody on your team and to help them understand better how to be a leader. Let's sit down and talk to them. Let's see where they are on their journey and how that might work.
And I think that is so important, is it's not a cookie cutter approach. Every one of y'all have different skills, talents. You can all do each other's speeches, I've noticed, because you all preach and live the same thing. But if someone came to you and said, this is my situation with my company or my organization, you would sit down, listen to their needs and say, let's talk about your goals. Now let's develop a program either for your VP to make them if they can get pres, or your child to see if they can end up running it.
Do you want our evaluation of somebody? Do you have an opinion of them? Do you want us to sit down, talk to them? what's the goal? Is the goal to determine if they're ready for the next step? Is the goal to get them ready for the next step? Can we help you and take a look at the organizational structure? Maybe your organization isn't set up the best way for your people to realize all the potential that they have. We've watched and we've talked, Todd, with companies that do mergers and acquisitions, private equity, venture capital. And it's interesting to me that those companies are ready when they come in to talk about, well, your IT needs help.
Correct.
Your business processes need help. Your HR system needs help. And I'll ask people, well, what do you do about leadership? And it gets quiet. And the other thing that happens too, Todd, is that sometimes I think because we are fairly senior officers in the Air Force, there's a little bit of an intimidation factor. Well, they might be here to take my job. No, we're not. Right. We're really happy with our job.
Right.
And
I've noticed all of y'all really enjoy retirement too.
Well,
from the grind of it.
Yeah, and what we enjoy, Todd, in the transition to the not working in the military, is we enjoy the ability to have the command of our time, and to do the things that we need to do with that. And so we love to help somebody who again wants to help their team get better, have a more high performing team, to talk to the approaches that we might do it. The other thing that you get with Two Blue Aces is though we have a lot of individual pride about our experience and what we do, we don't have a lot of pride about saying, I'm not good at that. Mumbles is. I'm not good at that. Sparky is. Let's get you in. Let's let you talk to them. They got a little more experience in that, and so it's very collegial, and there's not a lot of undue pride when it comes to that.
And I've noticed that with y'all is, hey, what is the topic we need? Hey, you're right, Mumbles, you're probably the best person that can take care of this. It's something else. Hey, Larry, this is really your bailiwick. You need to be doing that.
Yes.
Talking about the book again real quick, your wife, Julia, was the editor of it.
She was.
And how did she like that experience? Dealing with it was 2 stars.
Well, it was interesting, again, the personalities and the different personalities.
There were personalities.
Came out as she did that. And her job was to make sure that we didn't show our rear ends when it came to grammar and other things. And she did a really good job of that. And then to help folks really reflect back to them, and so they could tell their story the way that they wanted to do.
I agree. I think she helped refine each of y'all's messages.
Yes.
On each of your chapters. And, the 5 chapters you touched on were on integrity, doing the right thing, the case for number 2 of bringing that next guy or gal up, building trust and transparency, and doing the right thing and mentoring. Anything in particular about the book or that experience that you can share?
It was a great experience in understanding, Todd. I was sharing the book with an officer who's a actively serving general officer right now in the Air Force, and we were talking about her organization. And as we did that, I was talking about this idea of trust, and the idea that trust. My thought and the thought I had to do in the book about trust helped me clarify what trust was and what transparency was. And I said, transparency to me is the idea that you trust me enough because you can see and understand the process, and you think the process is fair,
right?
And that to me is transparency. And this general officer told me that yes, there was she was dealing with in her organization, and trust to her was the ability to help her people understand that she trusted them, and when she said go do the job, she meant go do the job, and she had their backs when it came to that. And so my trust was a trust that you might share with your peers, or a trust that you might have as you worked in an international organization, which I write about in the book. Hers was about how you build trust with a subordinate. And so that discussion to me and she heard the way she articulated it was useful to me. So the book was useful in sharpening what I said. And then it's a wonderful tool in helping me peek around the corner for how other people that I respect treat the same issues and see it just from a different angle.
Hey, boys and girls, this is Santa Claus. I just got done doing the interview with Todd Dantzler on Todd's podcast. What a great podcast. I hope you listen in. We had a lot of fun.
You've flown heavies your entire careers.
I have.
What's the most challenging part of flying those types of missions? Which missions made you pucker a little bit as you're coming in? And maybe talk a little bit about the low altitude parachute extraction. That is an amazing video to watch.
It is. And the low altitude parachute extraction was a system we built in the Vietnam War. It's where the C-130, this big 100,000-pound airplane, comes down and opens the back door, and about 7 feet off the ground, throws three huge 42-foot chutes out the back, 14-foot chutes out the back, and drags a 42,000-pound tank out the back of the airplane and drops it on a little strip. Things happen real fast, and the mission was my first pucker factor because normally in an airplane, when you have an emergency, you slow things down. You think about it so you don't screw something up.
Right.
This airplane was such that things were happening so fast that you had to memorize what you were going to do because you didn't have time to do anything else. And so it put a lot of responsibility on you as the crew member. It was fairly exhilarating as it came out because the airplane would go from being 140,000 pounds to 100,000 pounds, just like that.
Does that immediately shoot you up in the air because you drop that weight instantly?
And so we're doing this in a podcast. Literally, you would take the stick, you would bring it all the way to your chest, push it all the way away from you as far as you could go, and then come back to center again, just that fast.
Wow!
As it came out with the control, and again, in a big airplane, that's not a normal control input.
Right.
But as we did it,
all this at 7 feet off the ground.
Yes. And the thing that amazed me, and the thing that impresses me about the Air Force and about the young people that we have in the military, and I hear a lot, Todd, about, oh, young people aren't any good anymore. They just don't know what they're doing. They just aren't sharp anymore. They just don't do that. We would go at the time, and this was in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and I was part of a very specialized crew that flew this mission at Lapes, and there were some other specialized crews, and they would use night vision goggles. And they would land on very short strips with minimal lighting at night. And there were like 3 crews in our 32 crew squadron, and these were the best of the best. And when they wouldn't go fly, their pucker factor was high, and they came back, and it was hairy, and it challenged these really awesome flyers a lot. Flash forward, now we're in 2000. We're going up into Afghanistan, and the needs of the mission were such that because we had to start flying, everybody had to do that. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just the best people in the squadron. It was everybody had to go do that. And we figured out how to train people how to do that.
Right.
And now when you go into the Air Force, a young first lieutenant, about the age of my son, 5-6 years in the airplane, does this as part of his normal mission. And we train people to do it like that. So a couple lessons. I trust young people today to do really hard jobs. They can do them. It's up to the organization to figure out how to train them to do those sorts of things. And that's a leadership issue in how you get people to be ready to do those really hard tasks.
So as you talk about that, what's the state of our military overall? What's the state of recruiting? If you watch TV long enough, you see negative stories about everything and the young people that you just mentioned. And, what's the real story, if you could shed some light on it for us?
There's an old saying that if the troops aren't complaining, then they're dead. And so it's normal and it's accelerated by now we have social media. And so people rightly have the opportunity to express their opinion. And we live in a democratic society, and
it's just magnified.
Yeah, and we have forever. If you go back and you look at the Revolutionary War, you'll find that there were soldiers who weren't real happy to be at Valley Forge, and let the Continental Congress know about that in letters and other things, and things were terrible. So my belief as I talk is that we are, in the United States, we are a global power. And if you want to be a global power, you have to have a presence and ability to work around the globe. And that's and there is not enough resource anywhere in the world to do that.
Right.
And so the nation has to make hard choices when it comes to its treasure and how it does that. And we're a democratic society, and we reflect that democratic society. The things that go on socially reflect the hard things that are going on in American society at the time. And it's not always pretty, and it's not always perfect. What I did learn as I was in the military there, Todd, was I trusted the people who I worked with. I trusted the people who followed me, that they were going to do the right thing. And I believe that they're trying to do that, and I believe that they're trying to make the best choices that they can. And it's very easy on either side of the political spectrum to point fingers as to what's going on in a large bureaucratic organization like the military and say that it's less than perfect. So I'll leave you with, I'm optimistic because I trust the people, and I know the people. I know because I know my kids,
right?
And I know the people that are working for them, and I trust them to do the right thing and to try to make the best choices for the country.
So the last question on that, and then I wanted to get something a little bit lighter, but it just seems like there's just a total lack of statesmanship in elected politics these days. And I know there are pockets, and if it bleeds, it leads on the news. So they put the worst of the worst on there. What have you noticed from your level, from your friends, about statesmanship? Is it in the military? You're still pretty comfortable with how things are being run? I know you're frustrated from times, but you're satisfied at times as well.
Well, I got to teach history when I was at the Air Force Academy.
Right.
And in doing that, I believe that, much like we have a simulator for aircraft, I believe that history is the simulator for thinking people who get to relive situations and to go back. And there's this false belief, I think, in the country that there's this era of good feelings where everybody cooperates and it's always bipartisan. And when you go back and you look, you find that in the 1950s, 1960s, that did happen. There were a lot of structural reasons why it didn't. Before that, it wasn't bipartisan,
right?
Heavily partisan. And we're back into that era right now. That's kind of the messy democracy that we work with right now. Is it discouraging? Sure. Is it easy to point the fingers? Yes. Is it better or worse? I don't have the perspective to know that yet. But I believe, Todd, and having been part of the system, I believe in the American system that we have, and that the loss of that system and the breaking down of those norms is more dangerous. Everybody likes to come along and go, well, we want to get rid of it. Let's throw it in the trash. And it served us pretty well for over a couple hundred years.
Yeah. And, your comment about social media, you had given the historical perspective as, hey, it was bad, it was good, we're kind of on a spectrum. But now you got 24-hour news, and they repeat the same story. So it's not like there's new news stories every hour. It's the same story, just a different talking head talking about it, or it's on social media. So it just seems like it's pounded into everyone's head. So it's very reassuring to hear you say is, hey, we've had some of these same problems. We seem to overcome them from time to time. And I appreciate that historical perspective that you just kind of laid out.
I think too. What did I hear the other day, Todd? Twitter. There's 21% of Americans that are supposedly on Twitter, and maybe half of those are actually real people. The rest are bots. So 10% So let's just assume that it's 80% of the population doesn't do that and doesn't pay any attention and really.
I'm in that 80%.
And really,
right, Eli?
Yep. And really doesn't care.
Right.
Because why? They're worried about their families. They're worried about their business. They're worried about their job. They're worried about those other sorts of things. And I think what the current social media allows people to get is if it's outrageous, it sells. And sometimes our politicians and our leaders follow that so they get attention by being a little more outrageous.
So something just a little lighter. UFOs are in the news right now. You had decades of being in the air, thousands and thousands of hours. Did you ever see anything as you're flying around that just made you go, what in the heck was that?
Nope, I got struck by lightning once. Lived through it, scared the out of me as we did that.
What plane were you in?
I was in a C-130. I was coming back from North Carolina, going back to Little Rock, kind of on a June or July night, kind of like this, and entered the front of the airplane, went out the exit hole, went out the back, which wasn't that uncommon, but bright light scared the snot out of us. But and I didn't, and I laugh because my kid. I have an uncle who absolutely believes that Jeff, now because he's an intel officer in the Space Force, knows exactly what's going on, and so he likes to mess with his uncle as he does that, because Jeff looked at me and says, "I don't know nothing about that, Dad." And but
Do you have that level of clearance when he could actually tell you, or?
Well, again, if he did, he probably couldn't tell me.
Right.
But again, this is my son, and he might go, "Dad, there's something I can't tell you about it." So now, that said, I have no doubt that we're going to find records, and we're going to find other things that are going on, and that's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah. So my last question to you is there a question that I did not ask you that you said, God, I really wish Todd would have asked me about this?
Oh no, Todd! I really appreciate the time today to come and talk. As you can tell, those of us that work in Two Blue Aces are short of words and short of stories. As we come back,
I do a lot of listening around you guys.
No, and Todd, thank you for your patience with that, because we value your skill and your experience and your the leadership and the lessons that you have for us a lot, because we can be. Sometimes babes in the woods as we come out of the military. So you, like many of the leaders that we've worked with in the communities, are fantastic mentors to us as we continue to try to serve and to learn more about the communities that we get to settle in.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. We have a monthly call in. And sometimes you guys start talking about acronyms and I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'll text Jake and say, what did Larry just say? Or what did Mumbles or Beef just say? And he said, I'll call you later. So, Larry, I want to thank you for being a great American. I want to thank you and your wife, Julie, and your sons for their service and your service to our country. Folks, if you want an excellent book on leadership, not authored by the same old business names and corporations with the same old points of view, but from real leaders who have done it on an extremely high level and sometimes extremely high pressure situations, please go onto Amazon and buy a few copies of Leadership at 100 Feet. Give them out to your senior staff, give them out to your junior staff. Think about hiring these guys. They're consultants. They can meet with you and analyze you with what your needs are, what you think your needs are. They can really make your company better and really help you with some leadership issues and some mentoring. The book's only $10, and if you think General Martin could help your organization with leadership development, long-range succession planning, strategic planning, or mentoring, go to Two Blue Aces. Do a little research and give these guys a call. In my heart, I know they're the real deal. I promise, and I thank you all. Appreciate it very much, Larry, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Todd, thank you very much, and Eli, thanks for keeping us out of trouble.
Hey everybody, I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. Our next guest will be the world famous Santa Claus, and he will be coming up in a couple of weeks. And I hope you will tune in, but it'll be a very special interview with Santa. You'll find out some things about him that you did not know, and maybe some things that you didn't want to know. So enjoy everything, and we'll see you soon. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944 or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.